When we discuss the greatest American generals of World War II, it's easy to gravitate toward the well-known names, those who became larger-than-life figures in military history. But while reputation plays its part, it's not reputation that wins wars, it's results. Today, we're going to rank the 5 best American generals of World War II, evaluating them by one simple, irrefutable standard: what they accomplished. Their victories, their battles, their strategic decisions, and the tangible impact they had on the course of the war. Each of these men had a legacy, shaped by moments of brilliance, catastrophic failures, fierce rivalries, intense friendships, controversies, and triumphs. Despite their flaws, when America needed them most, these generals delivered results. But before we begin, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you want more content about the commanders of history. And if you or your relatives have any stories from World War II, feel free to share them in the comments below. We'd love to hear them. Let's start with number 5. George Marshall, the architect of victory. Marshall never fired a shot in anger during World War II. In fact, he never set foot on the battlefield. Yet without him, America might have lost the war before it even began. George Marshall, as Chief of Staff of the United States Army, faced an unimaginable task in 1939. When he assumed the position, the American military was virtually non-existent on the global scale. The Army ranked a pathetic 17th in the world, smaller than Portugal's army. The entire United States Army consisted of fewer than 200,000 soldiers, with outdated equipment and First World War training methods still in use. Marshall realized the scale of the disaster and understood that if America was to survive, this pathetic force needed to be rebuilt, and fast. What made Marshall notorious wasn't his battlefield tactics, but his brutal and relentless approach to transforming the American military. He was ruthless in his decision-making. He fired hundreds of senior officers who couldn't adapt to modern warfare, many of them longtime colleagues and friends. Marshall didn't care about hurt feelings or military tradition. If an officer was too old, too slow, or too stuck in outdated thinking, Marshall removed them with no hesitation. His approach caused massive controversy within the military and government, but Marshall wasn't concerned with popular opinion. He promoted young, aggressive officers, often over their more senior counterparts, making bold decisions that would pay off in the years to come. His most controversial and infamous decision was promoting Dwight D. Eisenhower, who had never commanded troops in combat, to eventually become the supreme commander of Allied forces in Europe. Many thought Marshall had gone insane. Eisenhower was a virtual unknown in the military leadership circles, and many doubted his ability to handle the monumental task ahead. But Marshall saw something in Eisenhower that others didn't: an ability to manage complex operations, bring people together, and keep egos in check. Marshall's faith in Eisenhower would prove to be one of the most significant decisions of the war. Marshall's organizational genius during World War II is nothing short of legendary. Over the course of less than 4 years, he expanded the American military from 200,000 men to over 8 million. Under his watch, the military was transformed from a disjointed, outdated force to a well-equipped, highly trained machine capable of fighting on multiple fronts. Marshall personally oversaw the creation of new training programs that turned factory workers and farm boys into combat-ready soldiers in months, not years. He worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week, managing every aspect of the war effort, from troop training and logistical planning to overseeing the production of weapons and vehicles on an unprecedented scale. But Marshall's work wasn't just limited to managing troops. He had an unwavering focus on strategy and long-term planning. His ruthless management style became legendary in military circles. Marshall would sit through hours-long meetings with dozens of generals and admirals, tearing apart weak proposals with cold, unfeeling logic. He was a man of intense focus and dedication. Officers under his command quickly learned to come to meetings fully prepared, as Marshall had an uncanny ability to spot weaknesses in their arguments. Yet Marshall's reputation for being harsh didn't stop him from fostering loyalty among his top officers. If someone delivered results, Marshall protected them from political interference and ensured that they received the recognition they deserved. Marshall's relationship with President Franklin D. Roosevelt was a complicated one. Roosevelt recognized Marshall's brilliance and wanted him to lead the D-Day invasion, a task that would have given Marshall immense glory. But Marshall, ever the pragmatist, refused. He believed that his work was more valuable in Washington, managing the war effort from behind the scenes. It was a decision that would shape history. While Roosevelt was disappointed by Marshall's refusal, he knew that Marshall's organizational genius was necessary in Washington, coordinating the global war effort. Marshall's most ruthless characteristic was his utter intolerance for failure. Generals who made mistakes, no matter how decorated or politically connected they were removed without hesitation. This led to high-profile clashes, particularly with Douglas MacArthur, who wanted more resources for the Pacific Theater. Marshall, however, insisted that Europe had to be the priority. He fought fiercely for a Europe-first strategy, and his vision ultimately prevailed. Marshall's brilliance extended beyond personnel management. His most audacious decision was to push for a direct assault on Nazi-occupied France. While British leaders, including Winston Churchill, argued for a more peripheral strategy, Marshall understood that only a direct attack on Germany through France could bring the war to a close. For 2 years, Marshall battled the British to get their agreement on the cross-channel invasion, known later as Operation Overlord. He eventually won, using an audacious bluff to pressure the British into agreeing to the invasion. Marshall's legacy as the architect of victory in World War II remains intact. Without him, the United States might not have had the military capacity to defeat the Axis powers. He laid the foundation for America's war machine, ensuring that the country would not only survive, but ultimately triumph. Marshall's achievements are too often overlooked, as he never received the public glory that battlefield commanders enjoyed. Yet his decisions, made in Washington, were critical to every victory the U.S. achieved in the war. His efficiency, precision, and dedication to duty made him indispensable to Allied victory. Now, moving on to number 4. Douglas MacArthur, the Supreme Commander of the Pacific. Douglas MacArthur was already a legend before World War II, and his reputation only grew as the war unfolded. MacArthur had served with distinction in World War I, had been a key figure in the Philippines, and was the superintendent of West Point. But it was in World War II that MacArthur's name became truly notorious. His ego, his brash demeanor, and his absolute confidence in his own brilliance made him a difficult figure for both subordinates and superiors. He was a man who believed deeply in his own genius, and his arrogance was just as famous as his military strategy. MacArthur's leadership style was often controversial, but his results spoke for themselves. When the Japanese attacked the Philippines in December of 1941, MacArthur's forces were caught off guard, despite receiving several hours' warning after the attack on Pearl Harbor. The American Air Force was destroyed on the ground, and the Japanese forces quickly overwhelmed much of the Philippines. MacArthur, seeing the writing on the wall, was ordered by President Roosevelt to retreat to Australia, abandoning his men to the Japanese. As he left, he made his now infamous declaration, "I shall return." Most saw this as a bit of propaganda, but MacArthur meant every word. Despite his early setbacks, MacArthur's leadership would turn the tide in the Pacific. He wasn't just a strategist, he was a showman, and he knew how to use his larger-than-life persona to inspire both his troops and the American public. His ability to build morale was unmatched. He was never one to shy away from danger himself. MacArthur would often land with his troops during invasions, walking along the beaches under enemy fire to personally inspect positions, boosting the morale of his men. While some officers criticized this as reckless showboating, the soldiers loved him for it, seeing it as a sign of his fearlessness. MacArthur understood that to command, he had to be a visible presence on the battlefield, and he used this to his advantage. One of MacArthur's greatest strategic contributions was his development of the island-hopping campaign. Instead of attacking every Japanese-held island in the Pacific, MacArthur proposed bypassing the heavily fortified ones, and instead taking strategically important islands that would cut off Japanese supply lines and provide bases for further advances. This strategy allowed American forces to make faster progress, saving lives while cutting down Japanese resistance. It was a brilliant strategy that hastened the war's end in the Pacific. His first major test of the island-hopping strategy came in New Guinea, where Japanese forces controlled much of the northern coast and threatened Australia. MacArthur's forces conducted amphibious landings along the coast, bypassing heavily defended areas and cutting off the Japanese supply lines. The Japanese forces, who were expecting frontal assaults, were caught off guard. This campaign was long and bloody, taking 2 years of fierce jungle fighting. But MacArthur's forces consistently outmaneuvered the Japanese and drove them back toward the Philippines. In the Philippines, MacArthur's famous promise to return was fulfilled. His campaign to retake the islands was brutal, but ultimately successful. It was here that MacArthur's reputation for personal bravery and strategic brilliance reached its peak. He proved his critics wrong, and his forces liberated the Philippines, dealing a significant blow to Japanese power in the region. MacArthur's leadership and ability to rally his forces earned him the admiration of the American public, and his victories in the Pacific became the stuff of legend. Yet, MacArthur was not without his controversies. He was difficult to work with, often clashing with Washington over strategy and resources. He believed the Pacific should be the priority for American forces, while Marshall and Roosevelt insisted on defeating Germany first. This created a rift between MacArthur and his superiors. But despite this, MacArthur pushed forward, achieving victory after victory. MacArthur's most significant achievement came at the end of the war, when he was chosen to accept the Japanese surrender aboard the USS Missouri in September of 1945. His acceptance of the surrender was a moment of immense personal triumph, but also a recognition of his strategic brilliance. He had led his forces to victory in the Pacific, and now he would oversee the occupation and reconstruction of Japan. Under MacArthur's leadership, Japan was transformed. He oversaw sweeping reforms, introducing democratic principles, women's rights, land redistribution, and even a new constitution that renounced war. MacArthur's occupation policies helped rebuild Japan and laid the foundation for the prosperous nation that would emerge in the years following the war. In many ways, MacArthur's post-war influence on Japan's future far exceeded his military achievements. However, MacArthur's post-war career was not without its own controversies. His desire to expand the war into China and fight the Soviet Union after the war caused tension with President Truman, leading to his dismissal in 1949. But MacArthur's legacy as a military commander is secure. His brilliant strategy in the Pacific, his fearless leadership, and his ability to inspire his troops made him one of the most important figures of World War II. Now, let's move to Omar Bradley. the soldiers' general. Omar Bradley's approach to leadership was almost the opposite of MacArthur's. While MacArthur was flamboyant, dramatic, and often controversial, Bradley was quiet, methodical, and cautious. His approach wasn't flashy, but it was incredibly effective. Known as the soldier's general, Bradley was deeply respected by his men for his attention to detail, his ability to care for his soldiers, and his steady, unrelenting leadership. Bradley commanded more American troops than any other general during World War II, leading the 12th Army Group in Northwest Europe, overseeing over 1 million men. He was a leader who valued the welfare of his troops above all else. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Bradley's focus was on minimizing casualties and making sure that every man was ready for the battlefield. His goal was to win, but also to keep as many of his soldiers alive as possible. Before the war, Bradley had spent much of his career in staff positions, training other officers and working behind the scenes. He had never commanded troops in combat before the war, but when Eisenhower gave him command of the First Army in North Africa, he proved himself capable of adapting quickly. His rise to prominence came after the key disaster at Casablanca Pass, when his leadership helped restore American fighting spirit and capability. Bradley's tactical approach was characterized by a focus on realism. He knew that American soldiers, who had little experience compared to the Germans, needed more time to develop combat effectiveness. Unlike other generals who were overly optimistic, Bradley recognized the harsh realities of warfare and made sure his men were properly trained and prepared before launching attacks. In D-Day, Bradley was put to the ultimate test. He had spent months planning for the invasion, and when the moment finally came, he was ready. However, despite his meticulous planning, the landing at Omaha Beach became one of the most harrowing moments of the war. The German defenses were much stronger than anticipated, and the landings quickly turned into a bloodbath. Bradley was faced with a critical decision: abandon the beach or push forward. Bradley refused to retreat. He ordered reinforcements to be sent in and coordinated naval bombardment, all while ensuring his men stayed in the fight. His dogged determination helped turn the tide, and despite the terrible losses, Omaha Beach was eventually secured. Bradley's leadership during this time, especially in refusing to abandon the mission, was key to the success of D-Day and the overall liberation of France. Bradley's ability to command a diverse force, including Americans, British, and Free French troops, was a key part of his success. His reputation for steady leadership, quiet competence, and his ability to get things done without drama made him a favorite among his men. Unlike Patton, who was known for his fiery temper and aggressive tactics, Bradley's methodical approach to combat proved equally successful. Now, we move to George Patton, often regarded as America's most aggressive and controversial general during World War II. Patton was a man whose leadership was as explosive as his battlefield successes. Known for his audacity, bold tactics, and relentless offensive drive, Patton was both loved and feared by his men, and despised by many of his peers. His personality was larger than life, boisterous, unrestrained, and full of self-confidence. But when it came to battle, no one could deny his effectiveness. Patton's philosophy of warfare was simple: speed, aggression, and violence of action. His belief was that the best way to reduce American casualties was not by being cautious or methodical, but by overwhelming the enemy with such speed and force that they couldn't respond. Patton's approach often clashed with others, particularly his fellow commanders like Bradley. While Bradley believed in careful, methodical planning, Patton believed in fast-moving, aggressive strikes that kept the enemy off balance. When Patton's Third Army broke out of Normandy after the successful D-Day landings, the results were astounding. His forces covered hundreds of miles in mere weeks. liberating large swaths of France. His tanks, moving at incredible speeds, destroyed German forces that were too slow to escape. Patton's aggressive push into Brittany, Paris, and the Lorraine region was like a lightning strike that stunned both the Germans and his own commanders. Patton's forces drove so fast that they outran their own supply lines. But Patton believed that keeping his army on the move was key to preventing the Germans from regrouping or fortifying positions. His tactics were often controversial, and his relationship with higher command was filled with tension. His notorious clashes with Bradley, who favored more cautious strategies, and Eisenhower, who sometimes found Patton's unpredictability difficult to manage, caused friction. Yet, Patton's battlefield brilliance could not be denied. He achieved more rapid territorial gains than any other general, liberating more French territory in August of 1944 than all other Allied armies combined. His ability to exploit enemy weaknesses and strike where they least expected it made him one of the most feared commanders of the war. But Patton's personal flaws sometimes undermined his legacy. His infamous temper led to several incidents, most notably when he slapped two shell-shocked soldiers, accusing them of cowardice. This act nearly cost him his career, with Eisenhower considering sending him home in disgrace. However, Patton's fame among the German forces, their belief that he was leading the D-Day invasion, kept him in the fight. The Germans feared him more than any other American general, and his aggressive tactics made him an invaluable asset to the war effort. Patton's post-war views also sparked controversy. His insistence on rebuilding Germany quickly after the war, and his belief that former Nazi party members should be allowed to return to administrative positions, led to significant friction with political leaders. Patton believed that Germany could be a bulwark against Soviet expansion, but his views were not popular, and he was ultimately removed from command in October of 1945. His death in December of that year, under suspicious circumstances after a car accident, added to the mystique and controversy surrounding his life. Conspiracy theories about his assassination circulated for years, though most historians dismiss these as baseless. Despite his personal flaws, Patton's legacy as one of the greatest tactical commanders of World War II. 2 is secure. His aggressive leadership, fearless presence on the battlefield, and unmatched speed in combat left a profound mark on the course of the war. Finally, we arrive at Dwight D. Eisenhower, the supreme commander of Allied forces in Europe. Eisenhower commanded more military power than anyone in human history up until that point, overseeing the Allied invasion of Western Europe and managing the liberation of Nazi-occupied territories. But Eisenhower's most remarkable trait wasn't just his military skill, it was his ability to manage a fractured coalition of allies, each with their own agendas, egos, and strategic priorities. Before the war, Eisenhower had never commanded troops in combat. He was a staff officer with a background in planning and organizing, but it was his ability to unite diverse forces under a single banner that made him the indispensable man of World War II. Hand teeth. George Marshall, recognizing Eisenhower's talent, promoted him rapidly through the ranks, eventually placing him in charge of all Allied forces in Europe. It was a bold decision, as many more senior officers were passed over for the role, but it paid off. Eisenhower's calm diplomatic demeanor made him a natural leader, capable of balancing the conflicting priorities of the British, Americans, French, and other Allied forces. The most pivotal moment of Eisenhower's leadership came with the planning and execution of Operation Overlord, the D-Day invasion. The success of D-Day was one of the most critical turning points in the war. Eisenhower's ability to manage the vast, complex logistics of the invasion, coordinating air, land, and sea operations, while dealing with the egos of his generals and the political pressure from the Allies, was nothing short of miraculous. Eisenhower made the bold decision to proceed with the invasion despite adverse weather conditions, choosing June 6, 1944, as the launch date. Even after months of careful planning, the weather had other ideas. But Eisenhower, confident in his decision, took full responsibility for any potential failure, ensuring that the troops knew they were fighting for a cause greater than any individual. Throughout the war, Eisenhower displayed remarkable patience with his allies. Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister, often disagreed with Eisenhower's strategic choices, particularly over the Mediterranean campaign. Churchill pushed for more peripheral attacks on Germany, hoping to preserve British influence in the post-war world. But Eisenhower stuck to his guns, pushing for a direct assault on Normandy, the quickest route to ending the war. The success of D-Day and the subsequent campaign in France proved him right, and by the end of 1945, Nazi Germany was on the brink of collapse. Eisenhower's post-war leadership was just as significant. After Germany's surrender, Eisenhower was tasked with managing the occupied zones of Germany and organizing the rebuilding process. He faced numerous challenges, balancing the political realities of the Cold War while ensuring that Germany would not become a threat again. He also served as the 34th President of the United States from 1953 to 1961, where his military experience and diplomatic skills shaped America's post-war foreign policy. What set Eisenhower apart was his ability to keep the coalition together, to balance the needs of the military with the demands of politics, and to manage the egos of some of the greatest military minds of the war. While Patton and MacArthur were known for their individual brilliance on the battlefield, Eisenhower's ability to coordinate, lead, and bring together diverse forces across multiple theaters of war was what ultimately ensured Allied victory in Europe. His legacy as the Supreme Commander is unmatched, and his approach to leadership during the war remains a model of strategic thinking, diplomacy, and coalition management. As we come to a close, these 5 generals represent the pinnacle of American military leadership during World War II. Each brought their own unique qualities to the fight, whether it was Marshall's organizational brilliance, MacArthur's strategic daring, Bradley's steady hand, Patton's aggressive tactics, or Eisenhower's diplomatic genius. Together, they led America and its allies to victory in the greatest conflict the world has ever known. They were flawed, sometimes controversial, and always driven by their desire to win at all costs. But in the end, it was their results that defined their legacies. Their stories serve as a testament to the complex nature of leadership in wartime, where personal ambition, tactical brilliance, political maneuvering, and human compassion all intertwine to create the outcomes that shape history. The Second World War would not have been won without them, and their lessons continue to influence military thinking and leadership principles today. Do you agree with our ranking? Which general do you think made the biggest impact during World War II? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into history's most legendary military figures.